This is a meeting on opioid and the tremendous effect that's taken place over the last little period of time, and I'm very proud of it and the people working so hard on it. But I thought what I'd do is ask Secretary Wilkie to give a statement as to what just happened with respect to choice and the VA, because I think it's a very, very big deal. Robert?
Thank you, sir. June 6th was a doubly important day. We were celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Normandy Actions. And for VA, we began to implement the Mission Act, which you signed last year. On that day, 44,000 veterans came to us to ask for greater choice in their health care on day one. And we began to open up that aperture and provide them for the first time with urgent care across the country. So they now have what their fellow citizens have had for many years. And we expect them to take greater advantage of it as we go along. We've contacted over 9 million veterans to tell them this is now available to them. And it is one of the great transformative steps in the history of our department.
That's fantastic.
And it's
That's
off to a
choice.
very good start.
Right. VA choice.
Yes, sir.
So for 44 years they've been trying to get it, and we got it, and they're loving it, I hear.
Yes, sir. That many on the first day, that's a testament to.
That's a tremendous testament.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Come here. I'm proud of you. That's
Thank you, sir.
fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Proud of you. Thank you very much. Kellyanne?
Mr. President, thank you. The focus that the First Lady and you have placed on the opioid and drug demand, drug supply crisis roiling our nation is starting to produce positive results. We are all aware of the harrowing statistics, the tens of thousands of lives lost every year and other lives ruined. But today we wanted to present to you, through members of your cabinet and your administration, sir, a progress report. And I have some graphs here for you to look at as well. I will tell you that since you declared the public health emergency and since you have introduced a three-pronged approach to focus on prevention and education, treatment and recovery, and law enforcement and interdiction, all three of those areas have produced very positive results. There's a lot of work to be done. Battleships like this turn very slowly. We didn't get here overnight. We won't get out of it overnight. But it really does show how the whole of government approach, focusing on treatment and recovery of the whole person, is bearing fruit. Mr. President, in your opioid announcement in Manchester in March of 2018, where the First Lady and you talked about your vision and what to do in the opioid crisis, you called for a 1/3 reduction over the next 3 years in first-time prescriptions. I'm happy to report that you achieved that number in the first year alone. And that is owing in large part to enhanced awareness and education by both the prescribers and the consumers. There are just fewer people using these opioids now. Your take-back days that are led by Administrator Dillon have produced 4.7 million pounds of pills in the 5 take-back days, the last Saturdays in April and October. This is 4.7 million pounds of pills. Had you said 4.7 million pills, that would be impressive. But pounds of tiny pills that are just in the supply that people aren't using. They're unused, they're unnecessary, and they're expired. And that's enough to fill up 20 Boeing 757s with pills. So that's out of the supply chain. 1.2 billion lethal doses of fentanyl were interdicted by our Department of Homeland Security. That includes ICE and CPB, of course, in last fiscal year alone. I'd like to say to you, Mrs. Trump and Mr. President, that is at the points of entry, the 26 points of entry, but that's also between the points of entry. And we don't always hear that. This is just what we know about. We don't know how much we're missing. But that is literally saving lives. It was enough fentanyl to kill every American 3+ times over. In addition, the big ad campaign that you've asked your administration to put forward, we've had 1.4 billion views of all of the advertising and marketing materials. About 58% of our target market, young people, the halo effect of 15 to 30-year-olds, have seen these, and I'm happy to report that the long form ad that we had out won the Emmy this year for the long form ad, and that's pretty exciting. More overdose reversing naloxone. Your Surgeon General put out the first Surgeon General's advisory in 13 years last year, and it was about making naloxone, Narcan more available to we the people, and allowing us to feel comfortable to administer that either through a mist or a simple injection for those around us. This is literally saving lives. And then, of course, Secretary Wilkie will expound upon this, but you have roughly 118,000 fewer veterans being prescribed opioids. I think what the VA and you have done, Mr. President, is make clear that pain management need not mean pain medication. There are other alternatives to try first. There's a lot of progress. I'd like to invite different members of the administration to weigh in, but before I do, I would just like to say that probably the most remarkable bipartisan piece of legislation that you signed in your time as president was H.R. 6. This is the single largest piece of legislation ever signed in the history of our country on a drug crisis at one time. It ended up being a compilation of 50 different pieces of legislation. Usually when you add them together, you lose support. We actually gained support. Every single Democrat voted for H.R. 6, including all the ones running for president. Right. And I think they see the need in their own communities. It's an overwhelmingly bipartisan piece of legislation. Among other things, H.R. 6 included the CRIB Act. And this is an issue that our First Lady has really brought to the attention of the nation, that they understand 1 in 100 babies born every day, roughly 150 newborns every day in our country, are born already addicted, already chemically dependent. And the First Lady has raised awareness and resources that allows Medicaid reimbursement for counseling service and other health provisions, so that that we're keeping the mother and the newborn together. Better for the newborn, much better for the mother. The First Lady's efforts are also busting through the silence and the stigma that attaches with a youth involvement in drugs. And we also are very happy to report that as part of H.R. 6, the STOP Act has led to about a 6 times increase in the number of packages that are being examined coming from foreign sources. That literally is cutting off the flow of drugs getting in our community. There's much more to report, but I'd like to begin with our Director Jim Carroll of ONDCP to give you a report. We were just briefed on our success in China with fentanyl, and he's been traveling around the world. Jim?
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, both of you. As you recall, you did the work at the G20 last year, led to China scheduling fentanyl for the first time ever. The early reports are they've taken this seriously and they're beginning to implement the enforcement actions that we need to see. I've now rescheduled the trip to China, and I will be going at the end of the summer. What's important to note is that we really do have a whole government approach on this. For the first time ever, we have a government that is united against this, with 200 Americans dying a day. I've implemented your vision, as Kellyanne spoke, of the 3-prong approach, and it's beginning to pay off. You're going to hear from the other members of the administration today about the successes domestically, but also it's key to know internationally we are setting the bar for going after this.
Have you noticed a change in China since the trade negotiations broke off, a change with regard to the fentanyl?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is they're now at the table. They want to talk to us. They're engaged. We are actually in...
You mean it got better? I was thinking maybe it would get worse.
Yes, on fentanyl, it did.
Yes.
This is why they're great negotiators, right? But the opposite. Most people would say, oh, right? Isn't that something? That's very nice.
It went from non-existent to them at the
Tell
table.
them I appreciate it very much. It's very nice.
I will.
G20.
I
It's
will.
very nice, yep.
So we're beginning to tackle this. What we're also doing, of course, is working with the families and working with the children. They love what we're doing here. For the first time ever, you've committed more resources, more people, and a vision for this, and it's paying off. And you're going to hear from the rest of the administration now.
Thank you very much. Great job. You did a great job.
Dr. Jouar, our Assistant Secretary
Yes.
for Health at HHS. Dr. Jouar, you see a decrease in the number of overdose deaths in some of our hardest hit states like West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Could you update us?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Mrs. Trump. As a physician, I can assure everyone that the current opioid and overdose crisis is the most daunting public health challenge of our time. But under your leadership, with policies and programs implemented by people around the table, we are seeing real results now, saving lives. And I want to give you just a snapshot of that. Based on data released just this morning, so this is the latest data by the CDC, I'm pleased to report that this month is the 6th consecutive month of reporting for which overdose deaths were lower compared to the previous year. That's a remarkable finding. Nationwide overdose deaths have now fallen 4.4% over the past year, and let's look at some specific states. In New Hampshire, where you first announced your initiative, drug overdose deaths are down 4.8%. Florida, 8.1%. West Virginia, 10.3%. Iowa, 18.2%. Pennsylvania, 18.5%. And Ohio, down 23.3% as a result of the policies and programs that we've implemented.
And those are really the hardest hit states that we're seeing, right?
They are the ones that everyone would say, look at them, how hard were they hit? but the great cooperation between the federal and the local and the state have led to these kinds of decreases.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's very impressive.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Secretary Wiley?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mrs. Trump, I want to start on a point that Kellyanne has been making for many months. Particularly for VA, we needed a change in culture. Many of those who come to us are like professional athletes who've retired. They've had a lifetime of trauma, jumping out of airplanes, wounds in combat, and they come to us anticipating a lifetime of chronic pain. And in order to treat pain instead of the brain, we had to change the culture, which meant offering things that would have been anathema in my father's day in the Vietnam era. So instead of giving someone a pill, we tell them we can use acupuncture, or we can use Tai Chi, even yoga, music therapy, aqua therapy. And in addition to that, our physicians are in the process of reviewing all of our long-term opioid cases. And we are substituting successfully opioids with combinations of aspirin and ibuprofen, aspirin and acetaminophen. We are finding that that treats the pain better than the traditional use of opioids. And as a result, we are getting healthier veterans. The other thing I would say, in addition to what Kelly said about people turning away from opioids in the veterans community, since you issued your directive, veterans have turned in 35 tons of opioids. That's a lot of medicine for a population that ventures close to 9 million. So as part of the cultural change, we are changing the way the country looks at opioids and treats it, and it is a sea change. And it is probably one of the more important contributions VA has made to the nation, to turn our attention away from the use of these medicines and to try to make people healthier as a whole.
So how are we doing with coming up with a cure to the opioid? Meaning, I've instructed every single agency to work on this with Dr. Collins and all of the folks on a painkiller that's not addictive. And you would think they could do that. You would see, you see common medicines sold over the counter that aren't totally ineffective, right? So how are they doing a painkiller that is not addictive?
So what we are doing is we have been successful in using combinations of over-the-counter medicines, things as simple as aspirin, things that have been around since the late 19th century. And we are finding that those have the same or greater effect when it comes to treating pain. They're not addictive, they're not influencing the brain.
So you're saying the same or greater?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
How come nobody knows that?
Well, again, it goes back to what she's been preaching for a long time, and that is you have to shift the culture. You have to shift the trends. People have done things for so long that it takes a big push to get them on a different path, particularly in the military. If you had come to my father, who was severely wounded in the invasion of Cambodia, and told him that we would offer you Tai Chi or acupuncture to treat that pain, my nose would have been flat against my face because it was not part of the ethos. So we're on that journey, and I think what you've started in the last year has propelled us, and I believe it's starting to have an impact in the Department of Defense, where veterans treatment should start before they come to.
That's fantastic, Robert. Let me ask you one other question. So probably related, much more so than we won't even think it's related, and that's suicides. So you have suicides, and I hear numbers of 21 and 22 a day for veterans, which is I thought it was a mistake when I read it the first time. Is it 21, 22, 23? It's 20, so it's a slightly down. It was 22 originally. Now, I called you 2 months ago and I said I had seen it somewhere, and I've read really quite a bit about it. I think it's made by Johnson & Johnson, but it's a suicide, if you're depressed,
Yes.
you take it, it's an inhaler, and it almost immediately cures depression, at least for a little while. And I said, corner the market on it and give it to anybody that has the problem. Because you have people calling, and our folks do a great job on the phone, but it's a telephone. You have people calling, looking for help, and if those people had that, I'm hearing like instantaneously they're in much better shape. How are you doing with
We
that?
are working with Johnson & Johnson to distribute it. We should have it in all of our VA
That could make a
hospitals
tremendous
by the end of the
difference.
year. But it's in the purchasing process right
Is it
now.
very effective?
It's very effective.
So that all of these people that are committing suicide every day, 21, 20, 22 a day killing themselves, it's hard to believe. Honestly, when I heard the number, I said it can't be possible. How could it be so many? If this is as good as we hear it is, certainly on a fairly short term, it gets them over that problem. And I assume this lasts for how long a period?
Well, it is treated in stages. I think the
Right.
first dose lasts for a few days, and then it's
Which is, it gets them
you
over.
build on that, and you build up to a certain
So you're
dose.
working something with the,
With Johnson, yes.
okay.
With the company.
And I think they'll be very generous to you.
Yes.
And if you'd like, I'll help you to negotiate it, because seriously, I just said corner the market.
You're on a roll.
Corner the market. All right, so you're working on that, very important. I think it's gonna be incredible. I bet the first few months, you're gonna see numbers that people are gonna say, what happened? If it's as good as I hear. Good, thank you very much, good.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Secretary Wilkie. It is true that Dr. Collins at NIH continues to develop the non-addictive opioid, and I think some in the private sector are trying to do that also. Mrs. Trump, Mr. President. So our effort as the whole of government approach has been to treat the whole person. Sometimes if you're fortunate enough to go through a drug court program or a drug treatment program, you come out on the other side. Where are the housing opportunities, education, skills, employment? So through Secretary Costa and the Department of Labor, they've been able to issue record numbers of dislocated worker grants and actually get the opioid addiction levels down among federal workers. If you can tell us some more about that.
That's right. So, Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, as you know, we're the federal government's largest employer, and the Department of Labor oversees the workers' compensation programs for federal workers. Even before you declared it a national emergency, you directed us to make all efforts to address the opioid issue. And so, since your election, we've had outstanding results. We achieved those through, one, changing the protocols that physicians need to take in order to prescribe. Under the Federal Workers' Compensation Program, physicians now need to write an individualized assessment and a letter of medical necessity to explain why opioids are needed. Second, we have a team where physicians prescribe a certain amount or certain dosages. We'll work with that physician to ensure that the treatment is tailored to the individual. And third, we communicate both with the patient and by letter advise them of the danger of opioids, but we'll also let physicians that prescribe certain amounts or certain dosages know that we're monitoring their prescriptions so that they are aware that those prescriptions might be too high or outside of the range. And so the results since your election, a 65% decrease in claimants receiving a morphine equivalent dose of 500 or more, the highest, 65% decrease, a 51% decrease in new prescriptions lasting longer than 30 days, and a 1/3 decrease in overall opioid use among federal workers. The second part of this, and as important,
Does anybody know those numbers? Those numbers
should
are
know.
astronomical.
We'll see if they get covered.
we
Perhaps you people can report that. I mean, seriously, those are astronomical numbers.
They-
As really, when you're down 18%, those are astronomical numbers too. That's a lot in a short period of time.
a 65% decline in the highest dose, a 51% decline in 30-day or longer prescriptions.
It's fantastic.
The second thing that we've done is increase the fraud investigations, because often these are fraudulent prescriptions. And we've gone from 3 fraud investigations in 2016 to 42 in 2017 to 64 fraudulent investigations for fraud in 2018. So a 20-fold increase in investigations for, in essence, places that are prescribing them fraudulently and getting opioids in the circulation and undermining all these efforts, a 20-fold increase. And then finally, going to Kellyanne's point, when individuals receive treatment for opioids, they will leave a center and they will, have addressed their issue. But then they need a job. They need a place to live. And so we've been working with governors to fund programs where in opioid treatment centers, they have access to job training and skills training, so that when they are ready to re-engage with society, they have a future path that does not involve drugs.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alex.
Secretary McElhaney, would you like to tell us about the
Yes.
efforts at DHS?
Thank you, Mr. President, Mrs. Trump. We're making significant progress on the law enforcement and interdiction pillar of your strategy over the last 15 months. DHS, as Kellyanne noted, seized 5,000 pounds of fentanyl and its analogs last year, another 13,000 pounds of heroin, and we're doing more this year. The two main vectors remain the southwest border, as well as in mail coming in. And with our partners at U.S. Postal Inspection Service, we're doing much better in both of those vectors. One of the things that's been critical is your engagement with China and President Xi in getting additional data, so that mail coming in, we can assess it with advanced systems and do inspections and seizures right there in the mail facilities. Then we follow up with our partners in the investigation side with Homeland Security Investigations and U.S. Postal Inspection Service. We made over 200 controlled deliveries, taking out pill presses and distribution centers from Manhattan to Oregon in the last year.
So China's helping you.
China's numbers have gone up dramatically.
That's fantastic. Nobody knows this. That's fantastic.
Yes, since you engaged the president
That's
on it.
fantastic. It's very nice. I have to remember that.
The thing I think is key to highlight is we're going to be getting better in the coming months across all of this. We've trained 2,500 canines. We have new technology going into place on the southwest border. We're improving the advanced electronic data, and we've issued a challenge prize to industry to come up with a better way to inspect mail packages coming into our facilities to see if we can detect these drugs without opening all the million packages in commerce. I'll be going to Huntington, West Virginia with Senator Capito and Senator Manchin on July 8th to see the community level impact of the law enforcement partnerships and to hear from them on what we can do better at the federal level. And then lastly, I'd just say, Mr. President, this is my 6th meeting in the West Wing with either you and or the First Lady on this issue. I know you've had many more, but we're going to maintain our focus at DHS, reflecting your focus on this key priority. And thank you, Kellyanne, for your leadership.
And what about the southern border as it relates to drugs coming through?
Yeah, so we have both the dual problem, vehicles at our ports of entry and people crossing between ports of entry.
Right.
And the investments we're making in the wall between ports is going to help dramatically. And we're also buying a lot of technology so we can see in trucks and all those personally owned vehicles, huge investment that you advocated for in the FY19 budget. We're deploying that technology now.
How is the wall coming along?
Coming along aggressively. We built 2 miles last week. We're up to about 2 miles a week right now. So extending that capability across key sectors.
And you'll have by the end of next year, how much do you think you'll have built?
By the end of next year, over 400 miles in partnership with
Over
DoD.
400 miles, right?
That's correct.
And we have to kick and scream for every inch because the Democrats just will not give us what we need. In fact, I think we're going to be very close to 500 miles by the end of the year, which would be great.
That'd be great.
That'll have a huge impact. That's fantastic. Thank you. Good
Thank
job.
you.
Good job.
Mr. President, after 2 years of investigations, the DOJ and HHS have generated $3.3 billion in opioid fraud takedowns. We have Acting Administrator of the DEA, Udom Dillon, here today to tell us about that and more. Udom?
Mr. President, Mrs. Trump. DEA has made great progress attacking the opioid crisis through its regulatory and enforcement functions, and I'll just take a moment to discuss a couple of relevant cases. So, on the regulatory front, since 2016, DEA has reduced manufacturers' opioid quotas, that is the amount of opioids DEA authorizes to be produced, by 47%. So this has significantly decreased the amount of addictive opioids available for diversion for people to become addicted to overdose on. Kellyanne already mentioned our National Prescription Drug Take-Back Day, the records we've set. Last Prescription Take-Back Day in April, we had over 6,000 collection sites, the highest amount ever, and that's we're thankful to our state and local and tribal law enforcement partners who've helped us with that. We've also emergency scheduled fentanyl analogs. This is very important because drug trafficking organizations are very flexible, and they change the composition of fentanyl so that it's not illegal. So we emergency scheduled it, so fentanyl and all of its analogs are illegal. That is going to expire next year, but we are working with Congress to permanently schedule all fentanyl analogs. On the law enforcement front, we're working with our global law enforcement partners to attack the fentanyl crisis, to attack fentanyl labs where they arise. We're working with our state and local partners to seize drugs. Since 2017, we've seized more than 20,000 kilograms of heroin and over 6,700 kilograms of fentanyl. We're also attacking drug trafficking on the internet. We're seeing a lot of drugs being sold over the internet now, over the dark web. Recently in March, working with the FBI and other federal law enforcement partners, we took down 50 darknet accounts and arrested 61 individuals selling drugs on the internet. And most recently, also in April, DEA is continuing to hold accountable pharmaceutical distributors who DEA regulates. For the first time ever in April, 2 executives of one of the top pharmaceutical distributors in the U.S. were criminally charged for unlawfully distributing oxycodone and fentanyl. The company that they worked for has already admitted liability and has paid a $20 million fine. And finally, Mr. President, DEA remains laser focused on Mexican drug trafficking organizations, the ones who are bringing fentanyl and other drugs and poisoning our citizens, and we appreciate all of your support.
Would you want to name them terrorist organization or sub-designation that would give you additional power?
No, sir, I think we have all the authority we need. We just need the cooperation of our various foreign governments to attack them more effectively. We're working to gain that. Director Carroll talked about our efforts with China, and we're working with other countries to be as effective as possible attacking these.
And Mexico's going to be much different now, too. I think Mexico's going to start hitting them much harder.
That would be very helpful, sir.
Okay? Let me know. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, one of the cruel ironies of these drugs pouring into our communities is that they're coming through our southern border and through our U.S. mail system. And so, as we know, the 21st century drug traffickers are using low volume, high potency fentanyl in our own mail, tiny, tiny little amounts in packages. So today I'm very happy to have USPIS Director Barksdale to give us an update on some of the progress that we have and some of the challenges that lie ahead.
Thank you. First, thank you, Mr. President, First Lady, Ms. Conway, for having us here today. As you know, they may not know, the Postal Inspection Service is the law enforcement branch of the Postal Service. We work very hard to instill confidence in the U.S. mail and basically to protect the American public. One of my highest priorities as the Chief Postal Inspector right now is your issue of opioids, particularly as they flow through the mail system. So I want to thank you for your support on this initiative. As Mrs. Conway stated, your 2018 unveiling of the opioid initiative was the catalyst for us to facilitate greater interagency working relationship with all of my colleagues here. So we've been leveraging our partnerships. Since that time, we have actually placed postal inspectors with DEA, Customs and Border Patrol, and at the Office of National Drug and Control Policy. Our partnerships have allowed us to better interdict synthetic opioids into the U.S. through the mail system. And we're also beginning to work closely with our local law enforcement partners. We're still employing our traditional law enforcement, but we've also moved to more of a 21st century attack. We've launched our cyber and analytics unit to help us better forecast and target international packages. And we also, as Director Dillon has mentioned, we do a lot of work now in the dark web targeting internet sales. So over the past couple of years, we have achieved a significant increase in the amount of domestic and international opioid seizures, more than 5 times we seized this year than we've done 4 to 5 years ago. In FY18 alone, we made over 2,000 arrests in narcotics, removed over 96,000 pounds of illegal drugs, and seized over $17 million in illegal currency. So we're still working forward. The source is clearly China, even though we're starting to see a trend. It may be routed through other countries. And then later this year in September, I plan to travel to China to address this with China with Director Carroll.
That's great. Good job.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, that concludes our presentations. If you have any questions or comments.
Well, I would like to ask my wife, First Lady, to say a few words because she has been so much into the whole situation with the drugs and opioids in particular, but drugs. And she has a son that she loves, and she wants to make sure that Barron doesn't have problems, and she wants to make sure that a lot of people in this country, they see the suffering, the horrible suffering, and I just want to thank you for the great job. You see the numbers, we're down 17, 18, 20% in one case, 21%. And Alex, the numbers you gave were incredible. Nobody has ever even thought of that, 51 and 60%. So I want to thank you all, but I really think we owe a lot to the First Lady, and maybe you could say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your support, first of all, Kellyanne. Through my initiative, Be Best, I'm working with the families and our youth to get rid of stigma and talk about if you have a problem, addiction problem, and it's very important that you open up and ask for help. So I always say, love yourself more than you love drugs. And I will continue to do so to bring the awareness how dangerous drugs are, and talking with the families and young mothers and youth of the United States. Thank
Well,
you.
you've had a great impact, and we appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.